Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking one of the absolute most fascinating, highly debated, and frankly, wildly contradictory compounds in the entire world of human performance and recovery. It's known as BPC-157. Now, if you follow biohacking, sports medicine, or longevity, you've definitely heard the whispers. But separating the hard clinical science from the relentless internet hype, well, that's no easy task. BPC-157 has been a staple of animal research for decades, but with the brand new 2026 human clinical data dropping, the entire conversation is shifting. So is it a medical miracle or just a masterclass in internet marketing? Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this because this question right here, this is the hook. It's this almost science fiction level promise that has put this specific compound on the radar for so many pro athletes and everyday people dealing with those really stubborn, nagging injuries. I mean, we are literally talking about the possibility of accelerating the body's natural repair mechanisms in ways that, quite honestly, previously seemed completely impossible.
And that quote right there captures exactly why BPC-157 earned its famous nickname, the Wolverine peptide. Named after the Marvel superhero with the instant regeneration. This compound has taken the sports performance and longevity communities by absolute storm. People are sharing these incredible stories online about bouncing back from severe tissue damage, almost as if they've got an adamantium skeleton. But to figure out if there's any actual truth to this superhero moniker, we really need to look at what this molecule actually is. Let's ground all of this hype in some real biology. What even is a peptide? Simply put, it's a short chain of amino acids. Think of it kind of like a tiny, chopped-up protein. Now, the really surprising part is where BPC-157 actually comes from. BPC stands for Body Protection Compound. It's a synthetic sequence of 15 amino acids, but it's derived from a protein found naturally in human stomach acid. I know, it seems wildly counterintuitive that a compound designed to survive corrosive stomach acid could be the key to fixing a torn bicep, right? But the biological logic is actually brilliant. The thinking is, if this compound can protect our gut from corrosive juices and heal ulcers, what could it do if we applied it to other injured tissues in the body? Section 1, the evidence void. Let's look at the animal hype versus the actual human data. And this brilliantly illustrates the divide we've been dealing with for years. As we transition into the actual evidence, we run smack into a very stark reality. There is a massive, almost unbelievable gap between the preclinical lab results and real-world human data. On the left side of your screen, you have over 35 preclinical animal studies. We are talking about rats with completely severed Achilles tendons, torn quad muscles, and crushed nerves, showing mind-blowing accelerated repair. Basically, if you're a rat with a severed Achilles tendon, congratulations, you've got access to incredible healing. But for humans, well, look at the right. In 2015, a phase 1 human trial was finally launched to test safety and dosing. And then a year later, poof, gone. The trial was abruptly canceled. Zero data was ever published, and absolutely no public explanation was given. The official pipeline for human data just completely dried up. For years, we were left staring at this staggering number, fewer than 30. That was the total number of human subjects evaluated across all published BPC-157 research. After decades of mind-blowing animal hype, the human data pool was just shockingly shallow. But recently, in 2026, the landscape shifted dramatically. We finally got the first major controlled human trial focusing on hamstring repair, and it is entirely changing how we view this compound. Before 2026, the human data was pretty much confined to just 3 tiny, uncontrolled pilot studies, which you can see represented here. You had knee pain, interstitial cystitis, and a tiny safety study, all with very small patient pools and completely lacking placebo controls. They relied heavily on subjective relief. But that new 2026 hamstring trial finally introduced rigorous clinical data. It was a breakdown of an actual controlled trial design. The injury model focused on acute hamstring tears, and they measured hard objective endpoints, things like MRI tissue density and return to sprint times. For the very first time, we actually saw human data that began to mirror those legendary preclinical results that drove all the hype in the first place. To give you a bit of perspective on why that's a big deal, true clinical proof requires balanced, placebo-controlled data. Look at Eli Lilly's massive rotratratide trial on the left. Hundreds of participants, placebo-controlled, rigorously tracked over 68 weeks. For years, BPC-157 was completely unbalanced on the right. Just tiny retrospective groups with no control. The new 2026 hamstring data is such a massive deal because it's the very first attempt to balance these scales. applying real controlled methodology to the wolverine peptide and comparing it apples to apples with the animal data. Let's move to Section 2, the angiogenesis paradox. It's a classic double-edged sword.
So, the lack of historical human trials isn't the only concern here. We also really need to talk about how BPC-157 actually works inside the body. The magic of this peptide lies in a biological process called angiogenesis. This is simply the body's way of building brand new blood vessels. When you tear a tendon, which is an area that notoriously gets very little blood flow, BPC-157 targets enzymes to essentially lay down new vascular supply lines. Think of it like building a new highway system directly to a disaster zone, rushing vital repair cells and growth factors straight to the injury site. It acts like a master switch for regeneration.
So the crucial point is this. Angiogenesis is a massive double-edged sword. Side A is the Wolverine-like healing we all want. It speeds up tissue repair by feeding blood to those injured areas. But side B is the paradox. This is the exact same biological pathway that undiscovered tumors hijack to grow and spread. Tumors are greedy, right? They desperately need a blood supply to get bigger. By stimulating these vascular growth pathways, the theoretical risk is that, sure, you might heal your shoulder, but you could also inadvertently feed a tiny, hidden tumor. Without massive, long-term human trials, we just don't know the real-world risk.
Which leads us to Section 3, the regulatory crackdown.
Because official mainstream science pretty much stalled out for a decade after 2015, an unregulated global experiment completely exploded online. Let's look at the timeline of how this played out. Following that canceled 2015 trial, the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, officially banned BPC-157 for all athletes in 2022 under their unapproved substances category. Then, in 2023, the US FDA delivered a major blow. They moved BPC-157 to the Category 2 list, which basically meant it was banned from being produced by legal, safe compounding pharmacies. To be clear and completely impartial here, these agencies acted strictly based on the lack of human safety data and some concerns around immunogenicity. But that 2023 FDA restriction created a really massive, dangerous problem. It pushed consumers away from safe, licensed pharmacies and straight into an unverified gray market. When you buy so-called research chemicals online, there is literally zero quality control. Studies have actually shown that up to 58% of these unregulated peptides contain contaminants. We're talking bacterial endotoxins, heavy metals, and completely mislabeled vials with incorrect dosages. People who were just trying to treat their injuries were unknowingly playing a very scary game of bioroulette.
And that brings us to Section 4, the 2026 FDA reversal, an absolute massive pivot.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale of this regulatory shift. Just recently, in early 2026, it was announced that the FDA reversed course, removing over a dozen peptides from that restricted Category 2 list. As you can see, major compounds like BPC-157, TB500, and CJC-1295 are being transitioned back to Category 1 status. This means they are once again totally eligible for legal production by licensed compounding pharmacies. However, we have to be incredibly precise here. Moving a peptide back to Category 1 restores a legal access pathway via a physician's prescription, which ensures pharmaceutical-grade purity. But, and this is a massive but, it does not mean these peptides are suddenly FDA-approved drugs. They remain unapproved off-label therapeutics. It's not like the long-term human safety data magically appeared out of thin air. Rather, the regulatory framework for compounding them safely has just been restored.
So, if you're an individual choosing to explore this now that the Category 1 pathway is reopening, how do you actually navigate it safely? Well, first things first, step out of the gray market and consult a licensed physician. Second, get baseline blood work done. You want to ensure you don't have underlying health risks before stimulating new blood vessel growth. Third, only source your peptides from licensed 503A or 503B compounding pharmacies. They do legitimate third-party testing for purity. And finally, monitor your health closely. Use the minimum effective dose and definitely don't just stay on it continuously forever.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the immediate future, because the story of BPC-157 is far from over. The FDA's recent move is really just a precursor to the Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee, or PCAC, hearings scheduled for July 23rd and 24th of 2026. This is going to be a massive public showdown. It will feature fierce scientific debates, in-depth safety data reviews, and clinical use cases that will ultimately decide the long-term fate and legal availability of these peptides for good. So, we've seen the miraculous animal data, the terrifying void of historical human trials, the very real concerns over the angiogenesis tumor pathway. And finally, the regulatory whiplash and new clinical breakthroughs of 2026. I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Is the Wolverine peptide a revolutionary leap forward in how the human body heals, or are we just participating in a dangerous, uncontrolled game of bio-roulette? The true answer remains locked away in those upcoming PCAC hearings and the rigorous clinical trials that are really only just beginning to surface. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious, be safe, and as always, follow the data.